Hello, Jane. Good to see you again.
Hello, Andrew. Good to see you. And hello, everyone.
Hi, guys. Hope you're all well, and thank you so much for tuning in with us. Now, hope you're all smiling. Jane and I are smiling. I don't know if we'll be smiling for long because I want to introduce today's really great but really quite serious film. Jane and I decided we were going to look at Pan's Labyrinth, directed by Guillermo del Toro. I really hope I haven't butchered his name there. And yes, actually, Jane, I can't remember when the film was made. Am I dragging us back into our 1990s bubble?
No, you're not actually. It came out in 2006.
Great.
So yeah, it's good. And it's also, I think, our first foreign film, which
I
is
believe it is.
very
Yes.
exciting. And yes,
Yes.
as you say, directed by the great, I don't know if I can do it, Guillermo del Toro, fantastic storyteller and filmmaker. Um, and it won, I think, every single award ever that year, and deservedly so. It was fantastic. I think it got three Oscars, one for cinematography, I remember, which I'm sure we'll get back to. That was beautifully done. I know it's a fantastic story, brutal in many, 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 many ways. And perhaps just to set the scene, we are in Spain in 44, so we are the just after the Spanish Civil War, and under still under Franco's dictatorship. And this is a kind of dark fantasy woven into brutal realism kind of film. It's actually a bit hard to describe the genre of this film. I remember when I had watched it the first time, I talked about it to a friend of mine, and she was like, "So is it a war film? Is it a fantasy film? Is it what actually is it?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, a bit of all
Yeah.
of that."
All of the above.
Actually. But yes, a wonderful, wonderful film it was. Do you remember the first time you watched it, Andrew?
I do, yes. It was actually a few years ago. A friend of mine at work had actually lent me the DVD, and she told me that it was an incredible film. She'd watched it in the cinema, and she had bought the DVD as soon as she was able to, because also she wanted the director's cut
Yeah.
and the commentary, because like any good film, it generated so many questions and yes, so I watched it at home, and I was glad I watched it alone. It was not something I would have wanted to had I known what I was getting into. But I don't think I've seen many other films that are so imaginative and thought-provoking. And in places, there's a lot of sad films out there. This one is quite desperately sad in places, but also packed with mystery and suspense. And as you said, it ticks so many different boxes because you've got a handful of very complex characters, wouldn't you say, with quite a few supporting ones. But overall, it's not a massive cast. We're not dealing with Downton Abbey here. This is.
No,
Um, Yeah, and I suppose now might be a good idea to sort of talk about them really, because the main character really is the young girl Ophelia, isn't she? And I'm not quite sure how old she's meant to be, 11, 12 in
think
this
she's meant
film.
to be around 10. I think
10.
actually Del Toro had imagined her younger, but when he got this actress in, this young actress in, and I think she was around 10, he agreed to take her on board because she was really, really good, and I can see why.
Yes, yes, it was Ivana Bacquero, if I
Yes.
remember right. Again, apologies for any name butchery, but yes, she was really, really good in the film. So just to situate her, she and her mother come to live with the scary Captain Vidal, who's a captain in Franco's army, and you get the impression from the get-go he's really not a nice man. But Ophelia's mum is his new partner. You learn fairly early on in the film that Ophelia's father died, possibly during the war. I think it's largely left unsaid, really, but. So yeah, she finds herself in this grim place full of grim soldiers, a stepfather who is really not taking to her in the slightest. Remind me, Jane, their first meeting doesn't go well, does it?
No, I think it's the meeting, Ophelia and Captain Vidal, where she has been told by her mum to call him father, which of course
Hmm.
she's not particularly happy about. And she tries to say hello using her left hand, and he sort of grabs it and go, it's the other hand, Ophelia. Uh, I think he's not as such brutal towards her. He's just indifferent. And then, of course, when she starts to see the brutality around him and what's going on, she disappears deeper and deeper into her fantasy world. And of course, I think a turning point for her is when her mother dies and the younger brother lives, which is basically all Vidal wants. He's very obsessed with his legacy and getting a son, and he's even telling the doctor, save the child before the mother. So yeah, he's no, it's not a good meeting, and they never really take to each other. And I think for the main part, he tolerates her because he kind of depends on the mother to give birth to his son. So yeah, it's not a good relationship.
No, no, it's not. And I would say they're the three core human characters. And then as you said, you touched on Ophelia's fantasies, or indeed as the film makes us wonder, are they fantasies?
Indeed.
So I suppose the main mystical character, if I can call him that, is Pan the
Yeah,
faun, who
yeah.
who sort of makes contact with her and explains to her that she's really the lost princess of the fairy kingdom who's been reborn in human form, and he sets her tasks because she has to find her way back to her kingdom and her inheritance.
He's in many ways a fantastic character to bring on board because Pan is in the Greek mythology. He's a god, of course, of shepherds and of flocks, and he's described not always as a faun, but as half human, half goat. And he's also, a god of folk music. We very often see him with a pan flute.
Hmm.
And then, because in Greek mythology, the etymology of names is also very important. He's also behind the term panic because he sometimes would let out a scream that would scare both the beasts he was looking after, goats, sheep, or humans. And that ambivalence around him, is he good? He could sometimes be good, but he could also occasionally not be good. That sits beautifully in this film where you're kind of a little bit in doubt about him, and can she trust him? And his tasks also get harder as the film progresses, where he seems to be a bit of a sort of nice fantasy character at the beginning, but also becomes more and more brutal towards Ophelia as the tasks goes on. So he's a wonderful character to place in that ambivalent sort of, can she trust him? Is he good or is he bad? Kind of feeling. So that was really cleverly done, I found.
Yes, yes, he's quite amazing, and we see more of him than we do any of the other fantasy characters. Possibly a good thing because a couple of the others are really quite scary. I know you get these beautiful little fairies who manifest from stick insects, which I think is quite cute. There's that lovely scene where a stick insect is on her bed and looking at the picture of the fairy in her book, and then just goes, "1 minute, I am a fairy." And the film does it better than I've just done it, of course. But and we also have the grim ones. There's that rather hideous toad under the tree that she meets
Oh,
in.
that was disgusting. I didn't like it.
That that made me feel quite queasy. And we'll probably touch on him in more detail. But there is, of course, the pale man who is just utterly terrifying. Oh yeah, don't. It's it's the eyes and the hands and everything.
Basically everything. Yes, yes. No, it's certainly not a children's movie. This one, it's a very very brutal one, and I can see why again the cinematography was so praised because we have these very sort of almost like golden, warm tones in the fantasy world. And then in reality, in the real world, we have these sort of cold blue and gray tones. And you're sort of in and out of that almost black and white-ish in the forest and all of that going on, and into her very warm toned fantasy world. And it does a beautiful job of just letting you feel that through the visuals. So that's so many things the movie does really, really well in terms of storytelling on so many levels. And as you said, Andrew, just to touch on the characters as well, we don't have a large group of characters, but we have some really deep ones, many really layered ones in Ophelia as the innocent child, in the brutal Vidal, the stepfather and captain there, and Carmen, I think her name is, the mother, who's kind
Yes.
of dragged into it and didn't really have a choice. And then you have the resilience in young Mercedes, who's the maid, and
Oh, yes.
her brother is heavily involved in the guerrillas, in the resistance, and she's of course a bit of a double agent. And you have the doctor as well, who has a very small part, but a very vital one too. And together, all of that actually makes up for a really good dynamic.
Yes, yes, Dr. Ferrero. Yes, sorry, I was struggling to remember his name until a second ago, but yes, he's a marvelous character, as you say. Not that many appearances, but he does deliver some absolutely devastating home truths, however passively, particularly to Captain Vidal.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, a very good bunch, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, yeah. And the story itself is so complex because it's so multi-layered, isn't it? I mean, I know it centers around Ophelia and these tasks that she's given to perform, but at the same time, you have her poor mother trying to
Yeah.
survive a pregnancy in the background and Ophelia worrying about her. You have the uncaring Captain Vidal who's completely unaware of all this fantasy rubbish, but he knows he's been given this garrison and he has a bit of a guerrilla problem on his hands, which he's got to deal with, and he's prepared to do it by. I almost get the feeling, as you touched on earlier, that the family, aside from the importance of him getting a son and a legacy, really totally incidental, and he's got
Yeah.
his mission here. Um, and then everyone else around them just trying to survive the pretty hideous situation they're in overall. And certainly, I think most people are aware that life in Franco Spain was really not a laugh a minute.
No, and the we just talked about this before we started recording, Andrew. But the brutality is so not underplayed. It's very direct. It's very in your face. We talked about that little scene with the rapid hunters. He could have just shot them. That would almost have been more merciful. But
Yeah.
it's a brutal, brutal, violent scene. That one.
Yeah, it is, yes, and it's deeply disturbing, as I think it's meant to be.
Yes.
And it's yet another facet of Captain Vidal, who, weirdly enough, for someone who's very much second to Ophelia, one ends up spending a lot of time sort of thinking about him and discussing him because he's quite a layered personality too. I've no doubt in my mind about his psychotic cruelty because there's the killing of the two rabbit hunters, as you say, and there's the awful
Yeah.
torture scene with the resistance fighter who suffers from a stutter. And because he's so horrible, he knows how bad the man's stutter is, and he says, if you can say 1, 2, 3 without stuttering, I'll let you go. And then he stands back and enjoys the poor man trying his best to do it. And you just think there is something seriously wrong with you, buddy. It's you.
Yes, and it's yeah, no, and that's exactly, as you say, that's exactly the point. Is that it's the horror that those scenes are meant to make you feel in those moments, and then I think you automatically try to hold on to something that provides a bit of safety,
Yeah.
and in a way, that's where you turn to Ophelia. And whether or not it's her inner world or whatever, you kind of, however you choose to interpret it, that's where we get that. um, and you're so rooting for her all the way through. But the fantastic symbolism in the storytelling and as the plot unfolds is also in how her tasks become more and more difficult, and also when she herself chooses to disobey, how can things go wrong, and can you get out of it? And you touched on the pale man there, Andrew, and she kind of knew what she had to do. She had to rely on her intuition, and then there is that constant play between obedience, go in there and do
Mhm.
what I tell you to do and what you're meant to do, or do what you feel is right to do. um, what
Yes.
your intuition is telling you to do, and I think that conflict is portrayed really well in those little fantasy sequences as Ophelia discovers them in the real world.
Yes, yes, and it's beautifully done, and I love the depth of storytelling within each challenge, really, because and it the moral maze gets deeper the further she goes in, because the first challenge is pretty straightforward: go here and do this, do as I
Yeah.
say, and then yes, as you say, the adventure with the pale man. Which in some ways I find the most distressing of the three because of Ophelia's mistake where she goes, "Oh, I'm so hungry," and there's this beautiful feast laid out. And her decision costs, because of course those poor fairies are
Yes.
killed by the pale man, and she very nearly escapes with her, well, very narrowly escapes with her life. So yes, disobedience has consequences. But it's a very difficult lesson to observe because, of course, by the third task, and of course, Pan slash the Faun berates her for failing at the second task through disobedience. And yet, the lesson she's supposed to learn by the third task is that actually, if it's, as you said earlier, if it's right, you should disobey because if you go for the blind obedience thing, and I think this is echoed by what Dr. Ferreira says to Captain Vidal, if we just do blind obedience, then we end up with men like you, Captain. Oh no, he says only men like you can do that. It's very, very telling. Such powerful storytelling.
It's a fantastic line, that. And no, you're right. And I think that's probably another thing the movie does really well, on top of really great storytelling. It's the play around with that symbolism all the time,
Mm,
because there's so many bits and bobs of symbolism. You have, as you said, the pale man in himself is a symbol, of, in a way, Vidal's banquet earlier, that symbol of power, hoarding resources while children starve, the
mm,
the um the labyrinth itself is that place of transformation and of trial, of testing, and then you have that. I was thinking about that thing about keys and doors, where Ophelia has to draw like a way out, which is that kind of weird, who has access, who has control, who decides what's locked away. And there is that
mm.
whole Vidal thing with Mercedes, is this the only key?
Yes,
And
yeah.
so there is an obsession with who is in control and who has access to what, as well, which of course can be, again, vital if you have access to the right things. And then, of course, Vidal's peculiar obsession with legacy and bloodline, and with his son, and that peculiar clock thing.
Oh, yeah, the whole business with his father's watch.
Yes.
Yeah, that is complicated. The thing that always puzzles me, and I don't know whether I'm typical Toro film. There's probably no definitive answer. I get the feeling that Vidal's relationship with his father and his father's legacy is very complicated. Because the one scene I find most memorable where they talk about his father's memory is at the banquet where the one officer says something really nice. Oh, your heroic father, and I know the story about how he smashed his watch to, record the time he died because that's what a man does, rah. And Vidal's really dismissive, isn't it? Oh, no, it's rubbish. He didn't do that. Whereas I would have thought if it was a straightforward father idolizing, then he
Yes,
would have gone, oh, yes, and I do my best to, honor his legacy. But no, it's this weird kind of, do that.
yes, that is,
Um,
you're right.
yeah, and I don't know what to make of that. And it makes me wonder, in some really deep core, does, the young, frightened Vidal when he was Ophelia's age actually want to be where adult Vidal is now? Or did his father and his father's legacy make him and he hates his father for that? I'm probably going far deeper into this than anyone
Think you've
else.
got a great point because I think that kind of person is bound to have a very complex relationship with his parents and perhaps back then especially with his father. But it is an interesting scene because I was thinking, is he mad or dismissive of this because he doesn't really want to share his father's legacy with anyone, so he doesn't want others to have a memory of his father, or is he dismissive because he wants that to be his own memory of his father, or what? Because it was a very, very strange thing. Or maybe it was just a kind of I want to control all the narratives kind of feeling that he had. I don't know, but it does speak a lot about a very complex relationship, a very layered relationship there with the father, and I think also towards the very end when he himself gets shot, the last thing is to pass that on to his own son and say, tell my son when I died, the time of
Hmm.
my death. And you go, why? No, why? Of course not.
No, no, we're going to break the cycle. I'm really glad it's the resistance people who make off with the boy at the end because
And if you notice it, Andrew, but that's the first time there's a little flicker of panic in his eye. It's when Mercedes is taking over the boy, and he's trying to say that tell my son when his father died, and she just goes, no, he's not even going to know your name. And that's
yeah.
the first time you get that weird sort of no, 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 you must tell him kind of, and before he's shot a second later. Um,
Mm.
but that was so important to him, that weird little detail.
Yes, you're right. Because of course, at that stage in your life, everything else has fallen away, and it's only the thing you're most concerned about that you'll still be banging on about to people. And yeah, yeah, and there must be some sort of consciousness of his failure, in effect, that, if his family has established, I mean, we're never told what his grandfather did, but maybe his father behaved that way because of the grandfather, and to be the one who fails, this line stops with you, must be horrific for him. And actually, I feel he deserves it. It's but.
Yes, kind of, yes. And he just shot a 10-year-old girl.
I know it's the thing about him. You always think you've seen the depths to which he can sink as he goes through the film. I found him shooting Ophelia really, really shocking. I did not expect it. I thought what was going to happen was that he would be, threatening her or something, and then the resistance would turn up and save her, or something would happen. But no, no, it's just so
I think
awful.
that scene is even more brutal because she obviously can't do anything to him. So he's just taking the boy and he starts to walk away, and then she cries out, no. And then he turns around because she's like, oh, she's so annoying. And then he just,
Yeah.
so she's like something that, oh, just shut up, go away. It's almost in that kind of mood he's shooting her because there's nothing she can do to him at all.
No,
You know,
no,
there's
and
no
and
thinking that's the kind of brutality at all. It's just that's almost the worst bit because even though the torture scene is absolutely horrible, and I didn't really want to watch all of it, but you kind of know what he's doing. He's trying to get information out of
Mm.
someone, and he's trying to punish someone for standing up against him. But the girl, you
I
know,
know what can a 10-year-old do to the regime? It's and what can she possibly, do to influence it? What you could just as well leave her there to wallow in her helplessness. And actually, thinking of how cruel he is, I half expected him to do that
yeah,
because in his mind, if he thought about it, the cruelest thing you can do is walk away with the sibling that she's tried to save and just leave her to cry about it. Yeah, yeah, no, it's very grim, but again, great storytelling because you never see it coming. Until obviously the first time you watch the film, and and I suppose from a narrative perspective, it has to set up. It has to happen to set up Ophelia's passing the final test.
yeah,
Because she, having protected her brother, there's still that requirement for the blood of an innocent to be needed to open the portal and
yeah.
allow her access to
It's
the
horrible
kingdom.
to say, but it's a brilliant spin. It's a brilliant.
It is, yes, yes, and I know that it has spawned a huge and never-ending debate, and quite sensibly, I think Del Toro's never passed judgment one way or the other about whether what you see in that very beautiful final scene is a resurrected Ophelia coming back into her kingdom as a reinstated princess, or whether it's what she's seeing in her mind as she dies. Now, I like to believe that it's the former. It's, yes, we do live in a world that you see we're doing it now, or at least I am. I need the fantasy to make the world happier. She genuinely is a fairy princess and she's coming back into her kingdom, and that's what I'm running with.
Yes. Yeah. And in a way there is there is a truth to us needing. I think a lot of people are a bit dismissive about fiction, but we need we need fiction in many ways. It has a purpose. It is so many things. It is a mirror, it is a reflection of reality, but it is also an escape. And so
Yeah.
fiction can teach you an awful lot. And whether you believe it is a fantasy world or not, it maybe it doesn't really matter that much. Maybe it's whatever you want it to be. It's
Hmm.
kind of the same way some people have a very clear idea about what happens when you die. And no one is ever going to be able to prove otherwise. So if you imagine a paradise or a place where you go, I mean, maybe that's good for you. Maybe that is what you need to have.
Yeah, it's the offer of hope, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Which is what people need it to keep going, and
That's effectively what that is. And I think, Andrew, there was also the mention of now we're discussing themes of women as sort of agents of resistance, uh, because
yes.
women are kind of the only people in the story outside of the military, obviously, and outside of the guerrilla. So they become a little bit in between. You have Mercedes there and her almost like double role. She's serving Vidal and at the same time her brother and worry for him and working a little bit with the doctor there. And you have Ophelia's mother who doesn't really have much of a choice in her life, but to try and survive. She's even saying it herself in one scene that when you grow older, you will understand. And you have Ophelia in her own way resisting reality, and escaping into whatever you want her world to be, part of reality or fantasy. But either way, she is standing up to him, and she's standing up to the brutality.
Yes, yes, she is. There's a lot of it that pops up, and you're right. It's very cleverly done because certainly in Spain at that time and place, options for women were just non-existent, really. You've got no outlet for protest. You're in the middle of a regime which thinks you only really belong in the kitchen and you're there to produce babies, which really horrifically, I guess, is, as we said, is how Vidal sees Ophelia's mother. And yeah, and it's It's very tough, isn't it? Because you can't. I think the women are incredibly brave. Even Ophelia's mum, who has absolutely zero choices. Because to be honest, if I was her, I wouldn't want to marry a man like Captain Vidal. I would just go, no, actually, we'll take the poverty. Thank you very much. There are certain things I really won't do. But I know that she does it really for Ophelia as much as herself. And I can't do anything about the guy's personality, sadly, but that's what you're stuck with. I do admire Mercedes
Yeah,
because the torture scenes and the reprisals give you a very strong hint about what her fate would be if she was caught. And she does have a couple of close calls.
yeah.
I really worried for her the first time I watched the film, and there were moments I was like, please don't do something stupid and please don't die because it really won't be nice. And, we've already seen that this guy isn't about just, shooting people by way of punishment. He can be quite imaginative in all the
He,
worst possible ways.
he's not going to be merciful just because you're a woman.
No, no, you're not. I mean, he already probably sees her as little better than property around the house. And actually, in a weird way, it's that perception of their irrelevance. Because you're right, he takes no interest in Ophelia whatsoever. You thought even a bit of an offhand stepfather would pop in occasionally and say, "Are you doing your studies? Are you remembering to pray? This is a very conservative Catholic country. Are you doing all your holy stuff? What's that under your mother's bed?" And, but no, there's none of that. And so they're just kind of left. It gives them this sort of anonymity and an ability to be. I suppose the worst thing you can do in a regime like that to a woman is to really just make her invisible by treating her like nothing. But then that invisibility becomes a weapon, and I see it particularly with Mercedes, where she leans so far over the map table when he's planning his movements. Only after a while he goes, "Sorry, are you still here? Can I? Was there something else?"
True. No, that's a really, really good point. I think you're absolutely right. It's the ignorance, isn't it, that actually that makes for a good cover.
Yes, yeah, and the utter conviction that they cannot possibly be any kind of threat, I think, because the scene that really did scare me was when he questions her about, the key,
Yes.
and she
Yes.
has to sort of look him steadily in the eye when she replies, and I get the feeling he is a bit of a mind reader, the kind of skill nasty people like that have to have. And for a moment, I thought, oh no, she's going to waver when she answers him, and he's going to go, well. and,
You know what the worst bit is about those kind of scenes is that pretense of being kind, because there is a scene where he's placing a small glass in her hand. She's not drinking, but he's pouring one for her and one for him in a kind of, sit down, do join me, and you just go, this is not good, this is not good. And then of course he ends up taking her glass as well and giving her an order. But it's that pretense of, sit down,
mm,
relax, have a good time, and you go, oh no,
yeah.
that's almost making it worse. Just slap me if you need to, just don't be kind.
Yes, yes. To me it touched on this weird kind of mental blindness that so many fascists had and sadly have, where they do the most unspeakably evil acts, and yet they somehow convince themselves that they're civilized people and that they're a civilizing force. And at no point do they bring the two together and go, I really should think about this. I mean, when it comes to Franco and the phalangists, the right wingers, I think they basically chucked out their moral compass when they'd made the decision to overturn a democratically elected government and go, no, these people are wrong. We represent Spain,
Yes,
and we're
yes.
gonna.
But that's effectively the way you have to think, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the ideology. That's your mindset in all of that. But no, you're so right. There's some really great points there, Andrew. I was actually wondering maybe this is a question for everyone. What is there a thing, symbol, person you see as the most powerful symbol for you? I mean, we talked about the faun, the pale man, Vidal himself. Is there a thing that you see as this is this is the most powerful one in the story. This is the vital one for the story.
That is a really excellent question, Jane. Yeah, guys, please do share answers to that because we know there's so many symbols in this film that I'd love to know yeah, what's the one that got you the most, Jane? Did any speak more powerfully to you than others?
I think yeah, all of them. That's a very poor answer. I think the one that kind of got me from the beginning, when we see Ophelia and her mother driving through the forest, is the use of nature and symbols in nature, because
Mm.
that's a fantastic cover up. It's like nature is covering both her world and the brutality of the world she's stepping into. And we are returning to nature towards the end. Where the I think it's Pan's voice or the speaker is saying that, you know, she lived happily and she left little symbols around for us to find, and you see the flowers blooming and that kind of thing, and also nature is covering the labyrinth, and she's following, you know, the little mosquito things or whatever they are, and there was a very strong symbolism in the use of nature and beauty to cover a kind of very brutal world, that I found was really beautifully done, and something that it's not really spoken of during the film, but it's sort of planted here and there. We sort of get these
Yeah.
little, a flower blooming, or, you know, a little a fairy turning up, or there's sort of tiny little sprinkles of that I really love that. I think that, again, from the cinematography, beautifully created. What?
Yes, and it is a very beautifully shot film from
Yes,
start to finish.
yes. What did you think, Andrew? What was there a symbol that you?
Yeah, it was, well, it only hit me when I was rewatching the film for this because like you, all of them touched me quite powerfully, but and sorry guys, dampening the mood again. I'm going to come back to the unfortunately to the Pale Man because as ever with films like this, there's things you miss on the first watching that you then notice on the second. And there were, and I actually had to pause the film because I wanted to make sure I wasn't being a bit wrong about this. But the symbolism in the Pale Man's lair, because she walks past that big pile of empty shoes, and the implication is these are all the children who've fallen victim. And I didn't think this the first time, but the second time, it kind of put me in mind of the Holocaust, you know, where you've got all those awful photos of the clothes of the victims of that. And okay, well, I know Franco didn't go for a direct equivalent in Spain. They could equally be the shoes of all the innocent political opponents who may or may not have been a threat. Because if we take, I'm never totally sure whether the Pale Man is meant to represent the fascist government and or the institution, not the faith, the institution of the Catholic Church as it existed in Spain at the time, or maybe an amalgamation of the two. Because the other thing I noticed in his lair, and these are pretty horrific, I had to go and look at a documentary so I could see them more closely. But there's all these medieval type paintings in the more ornate bits. You only see them for a brief period. And the way the drawings are executed, it's a bit like Lives of the Saints. But when you look at them closely, what they actually are is the pale man slicing up children and consuming them. And that to me was okay. Now, of course, Ophelia probably sees these things. And yes, it just really caught me so much because I hadn't noticed it the first time and I did this time. So I'm actually in a rather grim way glad I watched the film again.
That's a wonderful interpretation of him, because you're right. Of course, that link is a very good one. And just seeing the shoes, you know, you didn't see any remains of children. You just sort of saw what, and there is also something about, you know, the eyes in the hands kind of thing. That sort of blindness to everything else around you, you only really see what you want to see.
Mhm. Yes.
You can put the eyes in your hands when you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know, I'd missed the significance of that till you just said it, but you're right. Yes, your eyes sit there unused until
Yes,
there's something you must do, and it's incredibly creepy.
it
But yeah,
is. It is. And the fact that he can only see when he's
yeah,
doing that, which is, normally, and at least in the olden days, this was a sort of, teasing kind of, this is what you did when you were trying to tease someone.
yeah.
So the fact that he's sitting there with his eyes and he can only see like this is
Mm.
oh, it's yeah, it's brutal and weird and creepy at the same time.
Yeah, and it's such a hideous perversion of all these institutions and ideas that nominally are actually supposed to look after people. Like, most of us who are lucky to live in free country, we look to our government, we look to religious institutions. So many of us look to the church or an equivalent to be a source of comfort and protection. And yet he is anything but. He's just this greedy, murderous, grasping thing.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, don't get me started on the eyes. But while I've mentioned him, I do want to give a shout out to someone who hardly ever gets
Ah,
credit.
yes.
Yeah, of course, Doug Jones, the
Yes.
actor who most of you have seen the film before, guys, probably know that he plays both the Pale Man and Pan,
Yeah.
which is an incredibly tough job because the prosthetics and the costumes for those must have been a nightmare.
I think it took forever to get into all of that. Am I right in saying he's American? He's
He's American
Yes,
and he doesn't speak a word of Spanish, which, given that he had to deliver Pan's lines in
must have
Spanish.
been a bit of a tricky. He's very. If you've seen photos of him, he's very tall and lean and sort of athletic built, so he can do these different types of movements for characters. That's really, really very cleverly done. And I know that Del Toro has used him many times for fantasy creatures and characters. But he does a fantastic job, and in a way, it's a bizarre role to have both as Pan as the Pale Man, because, well, I guess the Pale Man, he just has to be very scary, but for Pan, he kind of has to create a connection with the figure, and
Mm.
it's, as you say, quite long conversations. So it must have been a really, really tricky thing to actually try and get in your body language.
Yes, yeah, because I can't even imagine. I mean, I didn't really go deep into all the prosthetics he had to have, but I just have fun memory. Well, I say fun memories of a Halloween party many years ago when I was a kid, and I was trying to talk to one of my friends through some folk vampire teeth, and you will not happen. And I was trying to get over this by sort of raising my voice, which just made it worse. And in the end, I just spat the teeth out. I'm really sorry. At least I can talk to you now. But of course, Jones didn't have that option, really. I was just going to take my teeth out so we can talk about this. Anyway, as I say, I am an impressive mystical creature with false teeth.
Yes, no, you're right. You're right. No, but yeah, but you're right. Yeah, shout out to him. That was a fantastic job as well. There was actually one more thing I wanted to mention, Andrew. That I don't know if this is a symbol or can be ascribed as symbolism, but I love, love, love the way they have used the lullaby. Uh,
Yes.
Both as a kind of very simple little melody that Mercedes can hum, but
Mm.
also especially towards that final scene where it becomes more sort of an orchestral version with full choir and strings and a very, very subtle piano in the background there. It's a fantastic piece of music, and it's something that is, it's one of those strange melodies that is both comforting and sad at the same time.
Yes, yeah, and it's very beautifully affecting because it perfectly mirrors, certainly for me, how we're all feeling at the end of the film. And it reinforces it beautifully. I know I've said this for some of the other films we've talked about in the past, but But all credit to the background noise in this one. I don't notice the music in the film, which actually, in a way, as we've said before, tragically is the sign of an extremely good film score because it's not meant to dominate, but it's always there. I didn't get round to listening to it separately, but I think I really must because yes, the only thing I did notice was the lullaby,
Yeah.
and
Guys, I'm going to link to a version of it that I love. That probably one of the only ones I really listened to from an orchestra, but it's from the National Danish Symphony Orchestra. They did a beautiful version of the lullaby. I think it's called "Long, Long Time Ago" or something. The lullaby, but there are no words. It's just a hum
mm,
and with beautiful light choir voices and strings and a piano voice, and that's kind of it. And I cannot remember the name of the composer now, which is really embarrassing. But hats off as well, because that was a beautiful job. And as you say, that lullaby sort of stands on its own a little bit, and is both in a way Ophelia's theme and I guess maybe also the way into her fantasy world. It's a kind of also the way she's asking Mercedes, "Do you know any lullabies?" And she hums this one. It's a comfort zone, I suppose, as well as a sadness. And it's beautifully used as well throughout the movie.
yeah, yeah, it is, and I mean, such a not a simple thing as such, but such a simple but imaginative implementation. Yeah.
There is a bit of a tricky question, Andrew, that I also wanted to just throw out there. But do you sometimes feel that does fantasy help us tell a story more truthfully?
Oh my goodness, that is
Is that deep?
wow, that is a question. Guys, your own answers to this question, please.
I mean, we've talked about the use of fiction before, and
Yeah.
but can we sometimes see things in a more brutal because the brutality of this film is certainly not hidden in any way, the
Mhm.
torture, the beating, the everything, even the way that Vidal is shot at the end, straight in the face, and you can see his sort of eyes rolling back. It's very, very horrible to watch. But maybe you can do that because you're constantly walking that thin line between reality and fantasy.
Yes, yes, and it does open a lot of possibilities for imparting truths in storytelling. I think I want to say yes as the simple answer to your question, because another thing that occurs to me about the beauty of using fantasy is that you can focus on what you want to get across. But through the use of fantasy, you can strip away people's mental baggage. Because if this had, say, been a pure historical drama with no fantasy element, I think I think anybody who was familiar or even thought they were familiar with the events of the time would sort of program their minds to think a certain way without even being conscious of it, and we'd already have preconceived notions. Whereas if it's all happening in a fantasy kingdom where we have no, or in a fantasy space where there's no familiar frame of reference, then then you can actually do that kind of thing because people will focus on what you're trying to tell them and they won't have anything familiar to hang their baggage on, if that makes sense. I find The Lord of the Rings does this very
Yes.
well, both the books and the films. And again, fantasy setting, so you can spot familiar themes, but you could never say that any of the locations in The Lord of the Rings are directly comparable to real life places. I'm getting a second opinion over here from the cat.
Hi,
Oscar
Oscar.
says hi, everybody.
Hi, Oscar. Oh, disappeared.
Oh yeah, yeah. He's sitting on my lap at the moment.
Oh, the tail, I can see his tail. That's fine.
Yeah. What do you think, Oscar? Fantasy for good storytelling? No, I'm just getting a strange look from him. It's not.
What are you saying, human? Just feed me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that is an excellent question, I think,
Yeah,
because
that's a really good point, Andrew. And I think sometimes we us working in museum and heritage side, we sometimes do that, I think, in history, because there are certain elements of history that we sometimes have very long discussions about in museums, whether or not we can display in the direct way they might have been displayed, done, talked about in a certain time frame. There are certain aspects of human history that we now consider too brutal or too disgusting or too morally wrong or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying we put a fantasy veil over it, but we are not necessarily showing it as it was, uh,
mm,
because we don't always feel we can. Um, and so I think sometimes you can use fantasy in a more direct way. You can do some pretty brutal things in a fantasy world because it is fantasy. And then you can make the comparison or hold that mirror up and go, oh, do you know of any equivalents in the real world? Or do you know of any,
hmm,
do you know of a bit like you say, we can always watch a fantasy war conflict movie and make comparisons to the Second World War or something. We can always we can always sort of talk of a brutal villain in terms of brutal dictators in the real world. And I think sometimes fantasy can maybe display things that, in a more direct way, whether they be good or bad, that we might not be able to do directly with the real world or with historical objects, for example. I mean, we often in exhibitions, we often have themes of slavery or dictatorship or war brutality, even torture. We have torture instruments from time to time. I also remember an exhibition once I actually did with not your exhibition at the National Maritime Museum, but another exhibition I was working on there, where we had a long chat about cannibalism. And
yes.
those sort of things, can how directly can we show these kind of things or talk about them? Should we just completely hide them, because that would be wrong too, or can we somehow make them part of a story, and reflect something that went on in reality, but maybe not like in your face kind of thing.
Oh yes, yeah. That's a very excellent point, and it is very challenging. Yes, I think there's no. I get the feeling there's no simple answer to it because the other thing I suppose we're having to grapple with that feeds directly into these questions is that of societal shifts and changes over time, and I think people's tolerance for things kind of rise and fall almost with the seasons.
True.
Um, and I know people sometimes sigh deeply and go, "Oh, what's flavor of the month these days?" But that well-worn does touch on a very real phenomenon, which is that as societies develop, people's ideas change, and what people might have no problem having served up to them directly in one generation will be completely no in the next. Um, yes, it's a very tough one to disentangle, and I guess it really does depend on what one is trying to convey. Um, yeah, brutality is always a tough one to deal
Yeah.
with. It helps us to it helps us to desensitize it if it's presented in a fantasy setting, I
Yeah.
think.
It's a good.
Yes, while at the same time not shying from a certain terrible reality. I suppose the other one that's been quite successful culturally in recent years is the Game of Thrones franchise, which I gather George Martin's books are very much medieval Europe, just with all the, names
Yeah.
changed and various things mixed around. I hope I'm not doing George Martin a disservice there. I've never read them, but that's what I'm told. With a bit of magic and dragons thrown in just to really, mix the pot up a bit. Sorry, I'm making his books sound terrible. I do apologize. I'm sure they're not.
But you,
But yeah, that's basically it. It is medieval Europe repackaged, with all of its color and its splendor and its music and also its horror, really, because it was quite a horrific period. I'm sorry for all the medievalists out there who probably getting outrageously angry as I say that, but
really, really good point. And I think sometimes that is what um, fantasy fiction, whatever we're calling it, that is what it can help us do. It can sometimes help us depict something that would otherwise maybe have been a bit too difficult to talk about, a show or display.
yes, because it then gives you the talking point, doesn't it? That people have all experienced and can get at more easily. Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
that took a dark turn, everyone.
no, it's actually a really good question, and actually, I suppose in a way, Del Toro actually tackled this issue very well in Pan's Labyrinth. It's a masterclass in
He's
how to blend reality and fantasy and
he's not
make
afraid of being controversial, and he's certainly not afraid of going into the difficult, the sometimes dark and difficult layers of story and history.
Hmm.
You've got to take your hat off to that because that's such not it's so not an easy balance, that one, but
Yeah.
he does it beautifully.
Yes, the first time I ever watched this film, I had a strange and almost really poor Ophelia, quite patronizing thought, which is that, as you said earlier, Del Toro actually wanted Ophelia's character to be that bit younger. The first time I watched this film, I thought that was such a burden to lay on the shoulders of a girl that age, even if she's only a fictional character. I would it would have been better if she was in her teens or even a bit older, because you shouldn't subject a child to such things. But I suppose the reality was that if you were a child in that position in Spain in 1944, then that's what you've got, and that's what you've got to go through and work with, and there's no two ways about it. So,
I guess her entering a fantasy world, her being relatively young also mean there is an innocence to her that
hmm,
plays up against Vidal, especially, and everything he stands for. Um, and I think maybe that is needed too. There is a that because she's old enough to understand a lot of things and understand her mum's position. But at the same time, there is also a bit of an innocent naivety, around. I'm going to take these. I think was it grapes she was eating, and she's sort of waving away the fair. No, no, go away. I'm eating this.
yeah.
And like any child would, in a situation where you're tempted. And I think that works brilliantly because she's relatively young.
Yes.
So I think it was maybe that balance he was trying to find. But you're right. I would probably have found it really unnerving if she had been much younger.
Yes, yes, and hats off to him, as you said. He tackles difficult subjects, and a child going through such things and having to deal with it is a very difficult challenge to. I was certainly a very difficult topic to portray in a movie. Uh,
Very, very. Well, this was a fantastic film. Um, Andrew, what do we need anything else, or should we hand over? Is it now we ask people what they think?
I think people have been patient long enough. So, guys, thank you so much for that. There are so many layers to this film, obviously. So we would love to hear from you. If there's anything you want to contribute to the discussion, please do add it below, and yeah, get into those comments and tell us what you think. There's so much to say about this film. I know people have written academic essays about this film already. It's okay. 2006 wasn't that long ago. So yeah, no, I know there's so much to say, and it's an enduring tribute to what Del Toro achieved with this film that, it's still so talked about. And in many respects, I think it hasn't been equal. There's nothing like it out there that I know of that quite, we struggle to form a genre for it, but I don't know any others that are quite in there with it. Unless you guys can think of any, tell me I'm wrong if you know of a good
And
one.
the films he did after were also circling in that area between reality and brutality and Cold War and fantasy, you know. So he's almost created his own genre.
Yes, yeah. No, but I must go back to him because as a director, he's great, and I would
Yes.
like to watch more of his stuff. So, but yeah, Jade, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone. And do share your thoughts. It would be fantastic to hear what we probably missed a lot. So do share.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, and especially for, as always, joining us and sitting through. We really appreciate it, and it's been great having you along with this film, and we look forward to the next one.
See you next time.
See you guys. Bye.